one and murder that one. Talking all that bullshit. I'ma put it to you like this, yo.
This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me. I bet you wish you was me, I know it, I know.
What is poppin', everybody? And welcome back to another special episode of the Only Friends podcast. Well, you know, it's me and my only friends, which includes, but is not limited to, my boy Hunt. What's poppin', Hunt?
Hey, Conrad, I'm doing well. I can barely see you through all these cameras, but
Way too many cameras
I'm doing
here.
well. We got a lot of cameras in here.
Whole bunch of shit going on in here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's almost like as if we're running a podcast.
Yeah, almost.
Maybe it's a fucking studio. How are your headphones doing, buddy?
I was gonna say, we're running a podcast.
How are
but I
you
ain't got
less
no
prepared?
headphones.
I was in the bathroom 30 seconds ago, and you're somehow less prepared than I am.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna tell anybody you was back there taking a shit.
It's just had to tinkle, buddy. It's like you're the host of the show or something, you know?
What happened to the headphones?
What did happen to the headphones?
The tech guy.
Are they
Yeah,
dead?
just blame me. It's my
It's
fault.
always the tech guy.
Guapo, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. No worries.
I don't know who put you in the position to have to wrangle these idiots every single day, but my apologies. You're doing a Lord's work out there.
Yeah.
Man, that's a
I don't
nice
stress
t-shirt, by the
anymore.
way.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's my t-shirt.
Huh? No, it's mine now.
Yeah, it seems like that's...
It's been mine for
that's the
like,
case.
it's literally been mine since we had the micro guys on.
Right.
So
Right.
Oh, that's
you're
a,
like,
that's a
oh,
the
I got
micros
shirt.
t-shirt?
Yeah, he's like, I got shirt. Here's what he said. I got shirts for all you guys. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And I grabbed the shirt. And I'm like, thanks, Berg. This is nice. And then like, you know, a month later, I was wearing it again. He goes, isn't that my shirt? I'm like, didn't you say I have shirts for all you guys? That implies here's a shirt.
You said
not you can have the shirt for the show, and then I want it back afterwards.
It was literally
And
for the show.
I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, and I'm sorry for your loss.
The shirt passed away into Brian's hands.
Well, what are you going to do?
I still have mine
It's a
from
nice
that.
shirt, though.
You
Soft.
mean mine?
Well, it's not mine anymore. I gave it to someone else.
Jesus fucking Christ. Which one was it?
The basic one, like the intro one, with all three of the characters.
That was the second best one. Lamanna has the best one.
I might steal that jacket.
And now
That's a
I
nice
have,
jacket.
Now I have Cyborg. I might give it to you. I've been buying way too many varsity jackets.
I noticed that. It's like you're like in a trend.
I feel like every
really
episode
like-
you have like a new either jacket or hoodie or
Berkey's
something.
in his varsity jacket era.
It's not just varsity. It's layers in general. I have probably like 15 jackets that I bought this winter. Of all different varieties. It was cold.
How do you own that many jackets? You live in the desert.
It gets cold here
I
in the
think
winter.
I have
huh?
like
I know
I
that,
have like
but you
one
don't need
jacket.
15 jackets
It's not
for 6
about-
months of
Yes,
reasonably
it's
cold
certainly
weather.
not about need. It's obviously
okay.
about style.
Fucking rich people.
Yeah. That's what happens. Every time I went in Bobby's room, Instagram gets me.
I had to delete Instagram from my phone because I bought too much useless crap off it.
See, you
not-
understand.
Yeah, I absolutely understand. It's just not jackets. It's just like weird devices that are supposed to make my life 1% easier, and it never does. Yeah, it's like just random shit.
Yeah. See, you got. I look good.
Yeah, I got. I don't waste money on clothes. I just waste money on even less useful things.
I literally just bought air fresheners on my face, where you can like hang an air freshener in someone's car, and it's a picture of your face. Pina colada.
Okay, I don't think I've ever bought anything that useless.
Why?
But, you know.
Yeah, just because why not?
For who?
Friend of mine.
Fred.
Okay. If it's like a troll,
forget me not.
troll gift, I can.
If you
I can
give me
understand that.
an air freshener with your face on it, I will hang it in my car.
There you go.
My girl has a bunch
For
of
at
those
least
of her dog.
Yeah,
day.
you can.
Bunch
I mean,
of
you can.
puppy.
You can use whatever picture you want.
Who the fuck do you give my Micros t-shirt to?
Don't worry about it.
Wow. Random booty call. Got your micros t-shirt.
God damn it,
Random.
man.
Fucked up, man.
Unbelievable.
It was my shirt. I took the same
It
idea
was
that Brian did.
not your shirt. It was my shirt.
Did he not say I have shirts
The
for all
worst
you
part
guys?
is I don't even think he wore it during the episode.
He didn't.
I think I did.
Maybe he did.
Maybe he did. It definitely wasn't
He
your
just said
size.
he didn't just to make sure that it, like he was with you on this one to deflect that he took your shirt.
I mean, I don't know what's happening. I know I'm not happy about it, though.
I agree though. When you say I have shirts for you guys, you made it seem like they were shirts for us.
That's what I
thought it was pretty clear. It was thematic for having the guys on. You
It
know,
was.
I wanted them to feel like you guys have actually seen the fucking Micros
I've seen it
before.
so many
Oh,
times.
we've seen it
You
so
I'm
fucking-
kind of sad I don't have a shirt.
Just
I got a
steal one.
cyborg one in my.
No, you wore that one. You wore that one. Conrad wore that one for the show.
Oh, I'm the only person that gave it back.
So
Look at that.
That's the irony, is that Lamanna didn't even fucking wear that
He
shirt on the
repo-broed
show.
himself.
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't, because I wore it. I know I did. I wore the blue hat that Melissa bought
That
me
might
for
be
the
the
World
difference,
Series.
okay? I wore the shirt, so
Which
I kept
mean-
it. He took a shirt that you wore.
Right, which means that
Rude.
like I had left that shirt here at some other point in time, and he just
I'm not
goes, "I'm
sure.
gonna yoink."
It's funny because this morning when I was putting this shirt on, I was thinking Berkey's going to say something about this being his shirt.
Honestly,
and I'm not going to give it to him.
Honestly, of all the people who fit the characters
I'm not going to give it to him.
of the micros, you're definitely Chase.
Yeah.
Actually, you're the antithesis of Chase. I'm definitely Chase. Now that I think about it, like, oh, 2 kings on an ace high board, we're all in.
Yeah.
Can I just say on the subject of shirts, sorry, Conrad's shirt, that shirt you're wearing is amazing.
So this was made by Johnny Vibes.
Oh, really?
This shirt is so dope.
By
I love it.
Jonathan
we
Vibes.
need to get some more.
I
Oh,
love
I
it.
forgot about it. Yeah,
I
it's
slightly
like,
resent the fact that I'm not on it, but I am on it.
You
Oh
are,
shit! Okay,
buddy.
I'm
What
right
are
in the
you
bottom
talking about?
corner.
The Terminator's in there.
Okay.
The Terminator.
I'm slightly resentful that he didn't use the red flame final table bearded one.
Yeah, that's
true.
great.
That's
That is true.
the
We gotta change
image
that
of a
out.
lifetime right
I love
there.
that one. I love that.
Man, it's so
Gotta
good.
make some more final tables, so I got some more final table pictures.
That's true. You know, it's crazy how much we ran above expectation at a point where I won't say we didn't know any better. Obviously, like, you've always been a great MTT player, but like for the rest of us who were in the dark, back in 2017?
2018.
It's 2018.
That final table was 2018.
Yeah, we decided to film Results May Vary. I didn't give a shit about MTTs. I was playing the big game at Ivy's room. I think Chin might have played like 5 events the entire summer.
Yeah.
We didn't know Landon yet. But, you know, we just have Hunt out there firing away. And was that your first World Series? Like,
It was my first live WSOP
that you
final
put in a
table,
full
yeah.
schedule? Well,
Yeah, I mean, well, it was the first WSOP that I put in that much volume. Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it was necessarily a full schedule, but it was pretty close.
Yeah. And it's just like, well, I'm just going to rip off a second place.
ripped off
and
one.
we just took it for granted. Like, oh, okay, well, that's going to be one of many.
That's going to happen a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, that's going to happen a bunch, obviously. Like, of course. Who
Yeah.
doesn't make many final tables?
We just figured we were going to have a lot of final tables, documented and on video and all that sort of shit.
I mean,
and
to
then
be-
you just decided you weren't going to play tournaments anymore.
Well, I think that we were a little spoiled because the prior summer, I had made 2 final tables and Jordan made 1.
yeah.
And then prior to that, I had this like string of WSOPs where like I was just consistently making final tables.
You made
if I
it
played.
felt like you were at a final table at least every year. Like it was like the World Series coming around, you're gonna make.
I have a very sneaky amount of WSOP final tables.
Yeah.
Dude, you have like a sneaky, like $4.5 million in tournament earnings or something, right?
Yeah, something along those
That's-
lines.
That's a lot. That's a
Wow.
solid amount of tournament earnings.
We've been playing a while.
yeah.
You know, it's been a long career.
Well, like the buy-ins you
long
play are
in the
pretty
tooth.
low
old man.
on the most part.
On average, yeah.
The buy-ins you play.
My ROI is like unattainable, like for sure, or unsustainable, I should say. Like I've ran way above it EV, but I think I
Depends on
have
who you
like,
ask. Some people think you're losing in tournaments.
yeah, I might be now. Honestly,
Depends on what you play.
it depends. But I think that, I think that like back when things were a lot softer, or they felt a lot softer at least. Sure. It felt easier to navigate. Like it felt like there was a blueprint to navigating the 3-day structure. Like, oh, okay, go out, fire, get the chip lead by dinner on day 1. Don't relinquish it until you're short stacked at the final table, and then finish 3rd. And it's like that's the way to go about this.
That's how tournaments work for you, at least.
That was
isn't it?
exactly how every summer. And then there
You
would
get
be
no hardware, but the ROI is really nice.
right. And then there would be a couple ones where you'd stall out. Like I had the chip lead of one of the weird marquee events. It might have been like the very first Colossus or something like that. The one DePaulo got 3rd in.
Yeah, it was Colossus.
Yeah. Okay. So it was Colossus. I like had the chip lead with that with like 50 left or something like that, and then I just melted. Just
Melted.
average stacks like 12 blinds. I'm just calling every fucking jam, never
That's-
winning flips.
Yeah.
Nobody made a final. How many final tables have you made since that second WSOP?
One.
One?
Or one live, 2
Last year.
2 online.
You've
Last
had
year
some
you said-
online
yeah.
ones, yeah.
I have 4 total, 2 live and 2 online.
Okay.
At WSOP specifically.
So we only have 2 final tables since that year.
Yeah, I bubbled one 2 years ago.
Our final table.
Oh,
is
you have
5K.
2.
I bubbled 2
You got the
actually.
5K.
You have 2.
I only have 1.
5K. Didn't you final table like a triple draw?
Yeah.
I got 9th. It was
Oh.
6-handed.
Oh, so it doesn't. Okay.
There was only 1 table left. Okay?
No. That happened to me. I got 7th in the
Yeah.
6 max.
That's true. Yeah.
And I got 12th in the
It's not an official final.
In the 10K.
table. We're not.
yeah. It's got to be official.
yeah. It's got to be official.
Nah.
Man,
True.
I'm
Fair
still
play.
tilted about last year's. Like if I win the 8s against Ace King flip, like I would have been a big favorite to just wire it. Like I went into day 3, like 17 left, had like 90 bigs. The next biggest was like 48 or something, and then just flip with like 11 left. We flip for 40 big. Well, it was 20 each, so a 40 big blind flip where, average stack was like 23 bigs, and if I win that, I would have had 65-ish with 9 left, but because I lose it, I have like 23 with 10 left. And it was
Yeah.
like, fuck, man. When
Big
you win that
difference.
flip, you go into the final table with just a monster chip lead. It's just like, and I ended up getting 7th. Obviously, it was like super tilting.
I mean, I think this
That
is
was
kind of a preface for the larger Strat Chat
Yeah.
conversation that we're gonna have. But because we're humans and we're living the experience itself rather than just being another iteration in some sort of model or simulation, I think that we feel all of the alternative paths that could have occurred
Oh, yeah.
once we get to a certain point, right? Like we don't examine it from the other side of it of like, oh well, if I hadn't won this flip with 100 left, I would have never made a deep
Oh,
run.
for sure. Like,
Nobody wants to think like that.
I wouldn't have even made that final table if Chino Reem didn't like absolutely
Oh, I remember this.
fire it into the abyss against me.
Yeah,
Just get it
Stone dead.
drawing stone
That's
dead
right.
for like a massive
right.
pot, like midway through day 2, basically. Like he absolutely just launched it off, and it was obviously a great high EV spot.
Yeah, but I guess like where I was going with that is that we tournaments are so weird because we almost in this industry use them as the barometer for talent more than any other metric.
Tournaments?
And specifically like results in MTTs.
Yeah,
right?
and
like
it's so absurd.
bracelets, wins, trophies, like whatever. We measure greatness based off of the performance that players tend to have in both large and small fields, how many wins they rack up, and all of the things along those lines. But we forget like there's so much variance involved in any one single event that's occurring that even if you were able to fix it so that you ran neutral, so that you never got lucky or unlucky according to EV, right? You still just have so many different finishes that you can. What are you doing over there?
He is mashing away.
Writing a fucking novel? Like Christ almighty. Maybe jump into this conversation instead of your Discord channel for 5 seconds, if you don't mind.
He's got more important things. He can't set aside an hour.
At least
to
he's not eating a
engage.
burrito while he's doing it.
Furiously typing.
He's just raging about somebody tweeting something, and instead of just doing it on the mic, just let him fucking have it
What
here,
did
buddy.
you say? What did you type?
It's not my time now.
Let me hear what you said.
No.
He's just shit posting.
Let's get a little insight into your
No,
Discord.
I'm looking at a hand that I played yesterday.
Oh, geez.
Shocking.
Yeah.
God forbid he's in the muck. But what I was getting at is like,
God forbid.
there needs to be a better metric. So it's like, okay, like not to use myself as an example, but I think I have like 12 WSOP final tables, never won one. And that easily could be because I stink at closing. I'm not a very good heads up player, and I definitely don't study any of this shit. So obviously all that stuff has something to play
There's
with
an
it.
element of variance.
But there's also an element of like, you're just going to finish in a bunch of, like, when you make final tables, you're going to finish in a bunch of different spots,
Right.
regardless of how you play. Like, you're just going to be dealt certain finishes. You know what I mean? You're just going to be dealt kings versus aces that place you 8th.
Yeah, it's a distribution. Your
Right.
your goal going into a final table is let's say you go in with the chip lead. You're like, okay, well, I have a massive chip lead. Maybe that means I win 35% of the time instead of like the 11% of the time that I would win if it was all random.
Right, and I don't think that we do a great job as humans of really comprehending that.
Not at all.
I can remember every single time that I had a big money spot on the line and I was in position to capitalize on it and got fucked. Like Legends of Poker, 14 left. I have an overwhelming chip lead. Will File a second in chips, just gets it in with kings versus my aces and goes, king one time dealer. King of clubs right in the door. I finished 12th. He wins it for almost $1 million. You know what I mean? It's just like that's just it.
Yeah.
You're just dealt dead. Like I have aces, he has kings. He rips a king. We're done. And actually, I wasn't even done. I still had like 25 blinds, but I ended up getting.
Then
in,
you were done.
No, I got in jacks versus ace 9 versus Choppy, and
Lost that one,
he
too.
just rips an ace off, sends me fucking back in.
It wasn't your time.
It was not my time. But like that's the thing is it's very easy to remember those and then play, like kind of play Monday morning quarterback where it's like, oh, if this event didn't occur.
It's not like you do anything different. Just if I want it.
Exactly. It's just if I didn't suffer variance in this exact moment,
Right.
then suddenly I'm a lot richer.
Yeah. It's also
Right?
the weird thing of like also forgetting the times where you fuck somebody else in order to get to that spot too.
Completely.
Where like tournaments are all just like a scam where you scam someone or many people multiple times and then it's like a race to the finish where you're trying to never get scammed until you win.
Right.
And then you can let it all like you can all crumble when it's all over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If anything, like some of the parts of tournament poker that are more difficult for me are to maintain a good perspective in instances where you run absurdly good. Like the win 10K in December, my second bullet day one. So I played like 1A, didn't bag, played 1C and did okay for like the first half of the day. The second half of day one, I just won every pot. Like it was like absurd. It was like cold 4-bet pocket 10s, a guy flats aces, I just flop a set and stack him, and just like stuff like that, winning big pots, and I bagged like a lot. And I find it hard at those times to not get into the mentality of just assuming things are going to go well. Like just like whatever you want to happen is going to happen.
Oh man,
So
I
you're
think
just like
I suffered the exact opposite problem.
Oh, really?
I just
Okay.
know there's a regression to the mean.
You're just expecting it to go
I'm
badly.
so
Okay.
well aware that good things have just happened to me that I know it's going to regress to the mean, and I'm already like counting my 12th place finish.
Man,
That's funny.
I see these things happen not in the sense of placement, but more like, oh, I won a few all-ins. Okay, now I got 10s versus their ace 4. Like an ace has to come, right? Because there's no
Yeah.
way you can't keep the snowball going forever.
Yeah.
Why does it have to regress to the mean in the exact tournament?
It
Why can't
doesn't.
you just rip off 5 tournaments and then not win one for
You
2
could.
years?
You certainly could.
That's
the
exactly-
thing. We
that's-
just have no
Right?
concept of data
Yeah.
sets.
That's reality.
Yeah.
What you're speaking to there, Brian, is like that. It's entirely possible that can happen,
Right,
right?
of
Like
course,
it can
of
regress to
course.
the mean at any time. It can stop at any time. Like
Yeah.
there's no predicting any part of it. So it's certainly a battle to stop yourself from getting into that mentality where when everything's going well, you start to assume it's going to keep going well, and so you make plays that are subconsciously you're predicting a positive outcome, and then the
Right.
inverse, when it's going badly, you don't bluff the river because you're like, of course he's going to have it, and then he
Right.
has bottom pair.
Yeah,
and you're
you
like,
have
fuck,
to-
why didn't I bluff?
You have to fight that mentality for sure.
Absolutely.
Just
It goes in both
n-
directions.
None of it matters. Like nothing. Like these bad beats. When you're on one side or the other, it just doesn't matter.
I think like the more you understand strategy, the more freed you are from this type of thinking too. Like I think back to 2016 when I put the super high roller bowl, and at that point, like the way that we cultivated knowledge for the game was largely felt. It was mostly observed, right? And then you would take those observations and you would try to run them through models as best you could. But like we were really at the early stages of solvers and ICM calculations and things of that nature. So you could only be so confident as to what the tendencies of the pool were. And that pool, in spite of the fact that I wasn't really too adept to be a tournament player, I'd played a lot with that pool throughout my career. Like the Tony Greggs of the world, the Merciers, the Chewies, and all these other guys. Like I've been playing with them since the early 2000s, and a lot of them also played cash, like Robo and Keith Gibson and True Teller and all these guys. It's like I had played hundreds of hours with them in Ivy's room, so I felt like I had a decent finger on the pulse of what was happening around me, but couldn't really package it together with how it's supposed to change in MTTs. And I remember as I was navigating through the 3 days, I started off day one I like rocketed out of the gate to an early chip lead, and then I lost a big one versus True Teller where I 3-bet him with like 7-6 suited, and he called with I think 7-5 suited on the button or something like that. And I ended up like turning a pair plus flush draw, potting. He called, and then I rivered 2-pair, which gave him a straight. And I ended up like check calling his like half pot jam or something like that, and it brought me way back down, only to have me then cool off Keith Gibson in a spot where I had kings and like was almost terrified to get it in pre. It was just like one of those situations where it's like, I really don't want to be one of the first 5 people out of this 300K. Like that would be so, because I couldn't separate the event, the moment itself from the strategy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, obviously the strategy is like, you're very happy to get in 80 big blinds with kings. Like you're facing a cold 4-bet. But what I knew of Keith was that he was very snug. And, you know, I didn't think he would put himself in a situation where he'd leave himself with like 10 bigs if he's wrong and whatever. Anyway, I ended up getting in and he has queens. And I just remember from that moment on, every single all in, I was like way on the best of it somehow and sweat it so fucking hard. Like I was just like, this is the one. This is the one where the other shoe's going to drop. I'm going to be the one to get 2 outed. And I'm going to have a story to tell whenever I exit this fucking tournament. And it just didn't really happen that way, right? I ended up losing a flip to finish 5th. But that was like,
but you cashed the tournament.
I cashed, and honestly, like that flip was probably the first. That was like the first real bout of all in variance that I faced. Every all in was almost like no sweat. It was like, you know, queens versus Tony Gregg's 10s for a monumental pot that is the difference between being chip lead or being like bottom 3 in chips. And it's just like, boom, holds. Let's go. You know, you keep moving on and moving on, and that's how you kind of feel like it's supposed to be. But the thing that I don't think people understand when they sign up for MTTs is that like you put the cards on the backs a lot.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's not
just play enough of them. You'll get it.
It's just not like cash. You don't get to redline people. I mean, there are certain phases where you get to have a little bit higher of a red line than maybe others, especially with ICM. If you're the chip leader, you get to lean on that a little bit. But generally speaking, like we're just gonna put the cards on their back and we're gonna run their equities.
Yeah, and a big part of how you manifest a high edge is finding ways to redline people in spots where you're not supposed to be able to do it that much. You know, like finding ways to like be bluffing at 15 bigs post from the big blind, you know, like just like find your check raise bluffs at shallow stacks and find your weird lines where it's blind on blind and you limp and then you triple off and shit like that. You know, just finding red line spots where most people are just playing straightforward.
It's kind of why like deeper in tournaments or like, because the game is literally made to end. So at some point, everyone gets a very small amount of chips. Some people obviously have call it chip lead or whatever, but most people are pretty short. And then it gets to a point where the shorter you are, like that, the higher win rate your stack is worth because you're playing a lot of all-ins, right? You're calling the all-ins, or it gets blind versus blind. They pile 10 big blinds, and you're just like, oh, I have an ace. This is worth at least a small blind or more. And then you put the money in, and then you win that spot. Now you're in a spot that you have average chips or maybe a little bit more, especially on like fast turbo structured type of tournaments, where now it's like, oh, I just had to win this one all-in. I didn't even need to be chip lead, but if I win this spot, this is worth so much. And the shorter, like, they're just made for you to lose.
Yeah.
And you should honestly be all in more in tournaments probably than you already are.
Yeah, I think it's funny because like people have this weird perception that solver-based strategies or theoretical strategies are like tight, or that playing tournaments according to theory is playing tight or whatever, but they don't necessarily recognize that if you were to actually play against a solver, it would be so absurdly aggro in some spots. You would, like, humans would really struggle to deal with it because it's like correctly aggressive play is so much more aggressive than most humans are comfortable being. You know, like the frequency that you're supposed to find, like the 3x pot jams and like the crazy, you know, 60 big blind cold 4-bet jams at low frequency with, you know, some random suited ace or something like that. Like all this stuff is the stuff that humans are not finding because it's the really low frequency stuff. But if you play against a solver, if you were to play 10,000 hands against a solver, even, you know, across that relatively small sample, you're just going to have so many spots that humans just don't find. And that's why it's not accurate to think that like studying solvers or playing according to theory is somehow going to end up with you playing really tight. If anything, it's going to be the opposite.
It's kind of why high stakes poker is what it is today versus the way it used to be.
Yeah, like does Stephen Chidwick play tight? Fuck no. You know,
Everyone there's just so much lower spots to win money because people are willing to put the chips in, and then once they put the chips in, your win rate goes down.
Yeah, there was I mean, it's kind of funny to put these together as we're about to talk about the Bencb tweet, but Jonathan Little put out a marketing tweet a couple days ago that basically asked if you had a 30% ROI in $100 buy-ins,
With 2K entries or whatever.
yeah, with whatever large field, 1K or 2K entries, I can't recall. How many buy-ins would you need in order to have? I think he misworded it and basically said 0 risk of ruin, but I think he meant sub 5% risk of ruin.
Yeah,
or
saying
whatever.
how much do you need to have a bankroll where you're not subject to variance?
Yeah, right.
And playing the ACR warm up every Sunday.
Right, and he had a list of an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
Somewhere
It's
in the neighborhood.
35,000 for a for
playing $100.
Yeah. So really crazy amounts of buy-ins, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Or wait, sorry, more than that. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000. And Fedor replied and basically said these answers are all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathan corrected and said, you're right. Whatever, you have to be even more conservative than what I'm implying. And Fedor never jumped back in, but my instinct says that that wasn't what Fedor meant. What he meant was if you have a 30% ROI in a game format where edges that large are difficult to come by, right? It's tough to have a 30% ROI in a $100 buy-in, right? I think people really fuck this. They think that these massive win rates are available. I truly think that guys like Chance believe that you can just have 300% ROI in live events. And
some people have had that over their years and their careers.
Right. And maybe that's his experience, but that's just not the simple math of it. It's nearly impossible unless you're just playing against an entire field of losing players.
Right, because it's this is the thing that Brewer brought up when we were having that main event discussion, where in order for someone to be winning at 300%, you need 10 players losing at 30% in order to balance that out, right? And then you account for the rake as well. It's really, really hard to be winning a massive amount.
Right. So it's this misconception that you can do specific magical things that allow you to garner an edge large enough where your
White
ROI.
magic, baby. White magic.
I mean, it truly is becoming the ultimate. I don't want to say cope. That's not the right word. It's like the ultimate drug being sold to the populace. Of you don't need to be a nerd in the lab studying. You just need to be good at the psychological human element. It's absolutely there's an edge there, but it is not worth hundreds of points of ROI.
What do you think? Do you think obviously the edges have gone down throughout the years because people have gotten better?
Yeah.
But what do you think they were 10, 20, 30 years ago, right?
Maybe for the best in the world, somewhere between 100 and 200.
It could have been because they used to talk about, well, we made a movie on it. You talked about your high roller, but dead money, right? Because there was a time where people were so, I think the worst of the worst were so bad that they literally were just could never win.
Right.
They were just never ever going to win. They were almost never going to cash. So you had a lot of people who did have these negative 50% ROIs, so that would allowed for other players, the best of the best, to have these 200-300% ROIs. But now it's
it's probably capped around 100 at most. It might even be a lot less than that, right? So I guess that's the overarching point. It's if you have a 30% ROI and $100 buy-ins, you can't wait around to have $100,000 to play them with no risk of ruin. That's silly, right?
The way I've always looked at it is that if you are playing at a stake where you are able to bring your risk of ruin down that low because your edge is that big, then inherently you're sacrificing EV by not playing higher. Because there's no such thing as a player who absolutely smashes for a high ROI at low stakes but can't beat mid stakes. That just doesn't exist because of how the game works. So in any situation that your win rate is high enough or your ROI is high enough that you can actually lower risk of ruin that low, almost always you would be making a lot more money If you played higher, it's just that you would have to deal with more swings. And that's always the trade-off, right?
And I think that's like the big problem. I'm glad Fedor said something and it didn't have to be me this time. But it's just like when you message things in a way where it's like, what should your bankroll be to ensure that you can't go broke due to variance? It's like, well, what an asshole way of saying things. You're playing a game that just has variance fixed inside of it. Like, there's no bankroll that can get your risk of ruin to zero.
Like you can't take a gambling game and make it not gambling anymore. Like you can't take poker and make it so that it's like, oh, I'm completely insulated from going broke.
Right, and of course, like he understood enough to correct once Fedor pointed it out, and he basically said, as Fedor brought up, even 375 buy-ins is not enough to ensure. But that's the thing. I think he went the other way. He basically like corrected and said, no amount can truly ensure that you can't go broke due to variance. All you can really do is minimize your risk of ruin while working hard to increase your ROI. Tournament poker can be brutal. Over 1,000 tournaments played, you may be down money about 28% of the time, even if you have, which that has nothing to do with your bankroll. That has everything to do with your ROI.
But being down money doesn't mean you're broke.
Right, of course. So he says manage your expectation and put in lots of volume. And it's just like, that's just kind of the thing, man.
It's probably like better to say like, look, tournament poker, there's a lot of variance. There's a lot of variance.
Just
poker. Just play. But yeah, sure, poker itself. Just play and like manage your expectations. You're not going to win very much. It's very hard to win.
Well, I don't even think it's that. I think it's like if we are able to quantify our win rate, then you can quantify your risk profile, right? Or you can qualify your risk profile, I should say, right? You can understand how aggressive. That the issue is that we can't actually pin down win rates accurately enough.
It's all just a guess.
Yeah, we're guessing
estimation
with some sort of margin of error, right? So it's like if you could actually pin down your win rate in specific environments, then you would be able to just Kelly criteria things. And you like that should be the easy counter here, and I'm sure that to some degree it is, right? Like when Fedor says like every answer is wrong, maybe he's implying that like the obvious, which is there's no amount of money that can reduce your risk of ruin to zero. But I also think that he's probably implying that if you have a 30% ROI, you don't care about having a risk of ruin near zero, right? Like you care about using Kelly criteria to figure out how high of a risk you can actually take without going broke.
Yeah.
Right. And it's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 to 10% risk of ruin. Maybe even higher, because it's important to be able to go out and print the actual EV that you are earning at a point where you don't want to be so conservative that you're not earning enough.
Like the likelihood that you succeed in that spot versus the amount of times that you fail is worth more when you do succeed.
Correct.
It's going to happen most of the time.
Yeah.
It's also kind of a silly way to frame it in that there's nobody out there whose only option of what they're able to play is I specifically am going to put in 1,000 reps of the ACR warm-up every Sunday.
Right.
Like that doesn't exist. Anybody who's playing that tournament is also playing other tournaments with smaller fields, lower buy-ins, maybe some higher buy-ins. They're playing a mix of events. So unless you specifically have an average buy-in of $100 and your average field size is 2,600 or whatever it was in the tweet, which is like really big, this isn't realistic anyway, because there's nobody out there where the average tournament you're playing is the ACR warm-up. It's a very big field tournament.
Right.
So it's much more productive to think about the overall spectrum of events that you're going to play and recognize there are going to be some outliers where at one side of the spectrum, you're going to have a big field to where if you run good in a big field, you make a massive score. And then on the other side, you're going to have some smaller fields where even if you crush those, the main purpose of those smaller fields is to mitigate some of the variance that comes with the bigger fields.
Right.
And you're always going to have a different distribution of tournaments that you play. For me personally, like in the last 18 months, I've played everything from the 25K in Bahamas to with 1,000 runners to like I like on a whim decided to play like a $200 no limit single draw event at Orleans like a few months back just because I'd never played single draw before.
How much fun was it?
It was fun. It was fun as hell. It had like 47 runners, right? So I've played everything from a $200 with 47 runners to a 25K with 1,000 runners. Like that's the spectrum of events. And for a lot of people, it's not on the same scale between 25K and 200, but online it might be someone plays $10 and they also play the 200 every now and again. So you got to look at the full spectrum and not just one event 1,000 times, because it doesn't happen.
So Efro has a question.
Yeah.
He says, it's hard to phrase this in a way that sounds like it's a serious question versus a dig. But someone like Chainsaw plays the softest fields across the largest sample for years and is below negative 50 ROI. Is it that hard to imagine a large percent of a lot of the fields are similar or worse levels?
I don't think the Chainsaw is minus 50% ROI.
Yeah, I think he's probably more like minus 10
5.
or minus 10 or 20. Yeah. Like I think he's losing, because I think that the spots where you need to take on volatility, it seems like the spots that he just never wants to take. So he's just like drawing dead to actually win.
Yeah,
big
he's probably winning small in the mixed events.
Yeah, I imagine so. But then the big field no limit stuff, like he has some chance of cashing when he runs good, but like he's never going to win because he just doesn't take volatile spots. So that's enough to like make you not get absolutely crushed, but you can't be winning that way.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, right? It's like it's a bit of hyperbolic to say that he's losing 50% ROI. But it's very reasonable to think that like there's a bunch of Chainsaws out there that are minus 5% ROI.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why the ceiling for the best players is like capped at like 30 or 50 or something.
In
along
order
those
to be
lines.
losing 50%, you would have to not be somebody who's losing by playing tight, but be somebody who's losing by whaling it up so much that you're just getting it in bad early on so frequently,
and still find a way not to win the times that you sun run.
But like that's the thing. It's not just that you're like getting it in pre with 30% equity. You have to be specifically like calling it off, drawing dead,
Right.
at a high rate in order to be like negative 50%.
So what he said is there's track sample for years. He's in the negative 50 to negative 60 ROI range year after year. Peak was negative 45-ish.
I mean, that's kind of shocking. I don't know.
Why does he still play? Like what? Who the?
How's he not reached his risk of ruin?
Yeah.
He's going to play slots, man. He just happens to be a couple poker tournaments.
That's
around.
true.
But he's playing like $500,000 to $1 million of buy-ins a year. Is he really losing like 225
Like
to 450K?
this is what I don't get. Like where does
That
he have
seems
money?
hard.
Like how do you just have that much money to lose every year?
Yeah,
weird.
I would really be shocked. But also sample matters. Even if you're able to look at this over a 10-year sample, that's still only going to be like 1,000 events.
Yeah.
Maybe if he's really aggressively grinding, 3,000 events.
Yeah, it is entirely possible that 3,000 tournaments, somebody whose true ROI is like negative 10 or negative 20 could lose at negative 50 over that sample.
Yeah.
He's definitely a good obsessive grinding. He only spends 2 days of the year outside.
Right,
of
but
hotel.
300 events a year is like a fucking lot. It's hard. I mean, that's only giving you like a handful of travel days.
Yeah.
And like no days off, you know what I mean? So it's like I would find, I don't know.
Let's not make this
don't
the
know.
Kessler podcast, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's like difficult. Well, I don't think it's about Kessler. I think it's more about that there are, regulars that potentially carry that big of a negative ROI.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can look at it from the inverse and say like, okay, well, there's a lot of regs that are winning at a much greater clip over a comparable sample than they're capable of maintaining if we were to 10x that sample, right? There's a lot of guys that we deem to be great tournament players that just have a 300 or 400% ROI. I mean, almost certainly, based off of how low my volume is, and I don't even mean it's like not even that low over 20 years. I probably have played somewhere between 2,500 and 5,000 events, maybe even more, maybe even like closer to 7,000 events. But because my ABI is so low and I have so many outlier scores, my ROI is just, it's unreasonable, right? Like I probably have like a 200 or 300% ROI. And that's just clearly not reflective of what my true win rate is. So the inverse is obviously going to happen to the people who are running poorly over a comparable sample.
Right. I mean, even if you have like 4 million and something in cashes, if you played 7,000 events at a 3K ABI over that sample, you're playing 2 million, 2.1 million in buy-ins, which means you have like 100% ROI over that sample.
200%. I would have double.
What you?
Oh, right. 100%
100%
profit.
ROI.
Yeah.
100% profit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
And 3K is a high ABI.
Yeah, that might be higher than what your real ABI is.
Right.
Yeah.
This is also not including online too.
Yeah, not including online. Online would probably regress it to the mean a lot more. But the point is that like that's kind of, I don't want to say the trap. Maybe it's the lure of MTTs, is that you just can be chosen for a lifetime.
Sometimes you're the chosen one.
Right. It's just like it's really hard to play 25,000 MTTs in a life.
It's
live.
incredibly,
you know,
it's almost
25,000
impossible to do it
live?
live.
Yeah,
I think impossible.
not impossible.
200 events a year for 50 years.
Doable.
Oh wait, no, that's bad.
right.
That's bad. That's bad math. I don't know what that is.
That's 100. That's 100,000.
50 events a year for 50 years, or 100 events a year for 25 years. That's not completely infeasible. Helmuth's probably 100 events a year for 25
For
years.
sure.
Man,
For
Joey
sure.
Weissman's probably already hit that.
Right. I think there are a lot of people with re-entries that are playing like 500 buy-ins.
What am I saying? 100 events a year for 25 years is 2,500 events.
Right.
Not
So it'd be
25,000.
Yeah, it'd be
Right. That's what
1,000.
I'm
1,000
saying.
events a year for 25 years.
Right.
I don't know.
That's probably not doable, but 500 events a year probably is.
1,000 events a year.
500 bullets a year.
Well, you have
500
to.
bullets.
You're counting bullets. It's not straight events.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean,
Right?
even so, I think 1,000 events a year.
No, but half of that I think is
1,000.
very attainable.
500 buy-ins in a year.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think it's attainable, but I also think that if you're good, you're gonna bag day one enough times that you're gonna like be forced to skip 1B and 1C,
Yeah.
so you're not gonna actually end up firing as many bullets.
But to do that over 50 years is
Even 20,
insane.
even
Yeah,
25.
of
Insane.
course, like-
Imagine
Right.
from 21 to 71. You're
Right.
playing 1,000.
If you're trying,
you're playing 500 tournaments a
if
year.
you're trying, you're getting in at bare minimum 60 to 80 bullets in WSOP alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I don't think that.
Alone,
I don't
that's
think-
where the bulk of it's going to come from.
Yeah. And I think you could get in more than
Well,
that.
now you're also saying,
I definitely think you
okay,
get more than
I'm
that.
only
I'm sure,
playing
I'm
live
saying.
poker. I'm not studying. I'm not
Right.
taking time off. I'm not seeing
Right.
family or friends or whatever.
That point's valid. Like the reason why it would never happen is because you wouldn't even burn out after a few years of doing it. You would just realize it's a fruitless endeavor.
Or you would burn out somewhere along the
Sure,
line, you know? And
but
that's,
even I'm saying even if you could stave off burnout, like you just realize at some point that it's a fruitless endeavor.
like, what am I doing this all for?
Right, the volume, like that's why it's so funny. People were memeing, but it was like Jay Little's tweet ended with like, be mindful of your expectations and pump out the volume. It's like, bro, there is no volume. That's the point.
Yeah.
Like that's the catch, or the catch 22
That's if
maybe
you're
to some
playing
degree
live,
of live MTTs.
What it ends up coming down to is the only thing you can do that makes any real difference in the span of time is just get better.
Right.
Get really fucking good at this game, then you'll mitigate variance to some degree.
Right, and I think that dovetails nicely into Bencb's tweet where
Get really good. Find a way to get into high rollers.
where he wants to talk a bit about future game and this notion that honestly, like he just worded it in a very sophisticated way, but what he's advocating for is passing on spots early in order to gain EV later. And I think that there's an argument that can be made for this. Well, obviously there's an argument that can be made for it because this argument is as old as tournament poker itself.
Joe Helmuth has
There's
made
just
this argument.
forever the Helmuthian Mattisau types, and then there are the new age guys
Right.
that aren't passing on spots. And I think it's difficult. The reason why the argument continues to come up is due to the fact that we can't accurately model this. So I imagine that we're probably getting to a point where we can run some very, I don't know, very like simple simulations that don't really account for much when it comes to skill edge or post flop or anything like that. But just like something like I imagine we could set up a sim in some regard where it just examines all of the average outcomes, and we run it from different points in the tournament, right? So if it's like, call it level 2, and you just program it to take a flip or don't take a flip, right? And then we just sim it out from that point forward.
This is the type of thing that is like being developed, but there's still a lot of work to be done to actually build this in a way that can be like in a productive way.
Right. And it might be much ado about nothing because my instinct tells me that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
My instinct tells me that like when you take that flip, it probably has almost zero impact on your bottom line, as it would if you passed. And honestly, passing might have a slightly higher impact on your bottom line in the negative because you're giving up chips.
Yeah.
Right? Like if we assume that you have invested some chips and somebody like jams and shows you ace king and you have a pair, you've foregone the amount of chips in the pot and you're choosing to like play for a better spot.
I actually think that the funny part about tournaments is that I think there's a decent chance that when we get to the point where we can sim all this stuff, we end up learning that everything that we have thought to be true about things like neutralizing volatility and reducing risk and ICM and preserving your stack and things like that. I think there's a non-zero chance that we discover that, in fact, the opposite is actually what's better. And more volatility is good. More big pots early on is good. More risk is good. More accumulation is good. We might find that out. I don't know if we have enough proof to think that it's true yet, but it's entirely possible that we could eventually, 10 years from now, discover that everything we currently believe about tournaments is complete horseshit.
Yeah, I think anytime that you're examining the different nuances of MTTs and like how, because all MTTs are an exercise in risk, right?
100%, yeah.
And you know, tweets like Ben's and Jonathan's and a lot of people who are out there influencing the MTT community as a whole, a lot of them are rooted in playing upon people's risk aversion. Right.
All right, I can mildly defend this take now.
Okay.
Well, I can defend this now because I had to read more because the tweet itself doesn't really do much of the heavy lifting.
The original tweet, you mean?
Yeah, the original tweet, but it's mostly called like marketing engagement, like do all that stuff. Sure. But then Gareth James basically said, "What's the best way you found to quantify future game?" And then he followed it up on March 19th with a tweet saying that there's no way to quantify future game and it's not needed. But the point is to skip break-even spots that cause you the most damage to your win rate. That I can agree with. There's a lot of spots in MTTs where some bluffs that you make or some calls you can make are potentially break even in a vacuum. And then like, I think he's mildly moving a goalpost here by saying the people you're playing against are not playing very optimally. So when you're playing versus people that aren't optimal, there's going to be more spots you can have more win rate than you should. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he's saying to pass on the spots that feel like maybe losing in practice, but not in break even in theory.
Right.
But then there's spots where maybe you can bluff range. Like he's not saying stop bluffing. He's saying stop bluffing or bluff catching in spots where you feel like it's worth zero and it might be very detrimental.
Yeah. But what if you are one of those people who are not playing optimally? Because that's the most of the field. And that's like the audience that he's portraying too. So like if you are a suboptimal player, you're a losing player, then wouldn't you want to always take the flips? Always take the
theoretically, yes.
That's, right? Because like okay, so if I'm like a dog in the field and I can get in a spot where it's 50-50, that's better for me. That's raising my expectation.
Right.
I think he's advocating for those people to study in some regards.
Right. Well, of course, that's always the number one thing is get better first. But when you're in the moment, you don't have time to study. You're playing the hand.
The thing that I dislike the most about the tweet, because I'm definitely not a fan of this whole explanation. I think the thing that I dislike the most is that it presupposes that a person has the ability to understand and intuit in game the difference between a break-even spot and a profitable spot. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem here, because the spots that people struggle with the most are the spots where they cannot identify, is this profitable or not? It's not that people are getting into a spot that they can easily identify is a break-even spot and then being unsure of should they take it or not, right?
Yeah, that's...
So he's not speaking to the problem that people actually have, which is they get to the river with a bluff catcher. They don't know, is this a spot where my opponent might actually be over bluffing, or is it a spot where they're drastically under bluffing? So if you don't know to begin with, if you don't have the skill level to recognize a zero EV spot when you're in one, it's not useful to tell someone stop taking zero EV spots, because what they're going to hear is stop taking spots that don't feel good.
Right. That's why I brought up the risk profile.
Yeah.
Right. Because at the end of the day, again, like MTTs are just a model for a risk profile of some sort, and people are always going to gravitate one way or the other. They're either going to be very risk on or very risk off. And I agree with you. I think the messaging here, and it's not, this is very identical to the pass on check calling with a hand that's making 15%
If
pot
it doesn't
share.
feel good, just fold.
Right. And like even in his explanation, he says there's these borderline spots where it's possible to debate whether we should call because we start making 1, 2, or 3 big blinds with a call, which results in somewhat reasonable win rate. But if you call or fold those, it shouldn't be a game changer. It's like, well, yes, it should. Well, yes, it should, because that's a lot of fucking win rate.
Like good example.
If you're
being,
winning 3 big blinds, that's there's very few pots that are small or large enough where winning 3 big blinds with the decision
winning 3
isn't
big blinds
massive.
in a hand is huge.
Right.
Right.
Right, exactly.
So like going through the comments in the thread, someone said there was a question that came up in an interview Jungle Man had with Vanessa Selps on the hypothetical. Day 1 of the main, your opponent shoves and shows you ace king. You have queens. What do you do? Right. And for some people, if they're losing in the field, you call.
I don't think anybody should fold.
Yeah. Ben says easiest fold.
I think that's ridiculous. I think that's so arrogant and projecting so much. And I think a lot of this tweet is probably a projection based off of what I know with the group that like Ben came through. Like it seems as though he was the contrarian out of the German group where they were very much slaves to the sim in some
Like
regard.
take the flip. Like you can do a lot with the chips.
Yeah, I mean,
whatever.
like, look, he came up with that Fedor crew. I assume that, and I don't know enough, but like Fedor's elite and largely due to the fact that like he understood how the game maps and he is able to add his own little nuance and touch here and there based off of what spots he takes and what ones he doesn't. But I imagine that collective, when they were on the rise, were very much of the same mind of it's just like things are good or bad, and like we do things that are good and we program ourselves out of things that are bad. And Ben strikes me as more of a broader thinker in the sense of, and honestly, like this is the way that I like to view the game too, from a very top level down, where it's like, well, maybe everything isn't black and white. Maybe there is a lot of gray. The only trouble there is sometimes you go down the wrong rabbit hole where like some things just are good or bad. And like going down the EV rabbit hole and trying to explain away why taking plus EV spots is bad and, maybe like taking negative EV spots can be EV producing in the future and stuff like that, that becomes an exercise in mental gymnastics. And I feel like all of this is like a large projection where this whole thread is just kind of explaining away why you shouldn't replicate or reproduce perfect solver outputs. But bro, that's a given. That's already understood. It's defaulted in humans by itself that we're not going to replicate solver outputs. So, now whenever we start to look at it a little bit deeper, where it's like, you can't fold queens. You can't fold a hand that has 54% pot share when you're talking about playing for stacks. Like the opportunity cost is not nearly as great as you believe it to be. You're estimating that your ROI in this event is so fucking high, that it's not worth playing an all-in pot on day 1 where you are receiving 56 or 55% pot share, something along those lines.
Yeah, like there's a comment from David Moses here that says, like under his tweet about future games, saying, this also ignores the flip side. People use the possibility of better spots in the future to excuse passing on current opportunities. If that future better spot arrives, it'd usually be better to capitalize it if they take the earlier spots.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's 2 other things that I don't like about this. The first thing is what I refer to as the edge paradox, where if you don't take profitable spots, if you start turning down profitable spots, how do you propose to continue having a big edge, right? How do you propose to be a big winner in the field if you're continually finding more and more reasons to fold profitable spots? Because eventually you no longer have that big edge, which means you should start taking the spots again. So where do you find that line where the edge is enough that you're going to take it, but it's, beyond a certain point, you're not going to take it. And now you're okay with, just keeping your edge in the area where it is. That's the first thing.
So you're saying like this spot is, it's marginal, but I think I have a small edge, but I'll pass it. I'll have a bigger edge.
Right.
And then the spot gets presented to you a little bit later down. Like, wait.
To be fair, I think we all do, like good players do this and they do qualify what it is. And generally what the line is a break-even call in theory that is potentially losing in practice is one worth passing on.
Right, for
That's
sure.
the unspoken truth here.
Yeah, and which means, and what's happening there is you're looking at the EV and saying this is 0 in practice. If there's even a 50% chance that it's actually losing, that means in the net, between the two possibilities of is it break even or is it losing, it's losing because it pulls us below zero. So now we fold.
Yeah, you're passing on a losing spot, which
exactly.
is
That's
good.
the whole
You
thing.
want to do
That's
that.
the whole thing. And then the second thing that I don't like about this as well is that it ignores the fact that the EV of a spot is not inherent. It's connected to how you play other spots, right? A certain spot where you get dealt aces, like you can do this with pre-flop sims super easily. You get dealt aces, but you're playing a strategy where you only play aces. The EV of aces is not high, or it's high, but it's not anywhere near as high as it would be if you played a normal strategy. And it's because other players are going to react to how you're playing. So you don't have the option to only take the really good spots, because if you do, the EV of each of those really good spots goes down because your opponents are going to respond differently. You're going to have a different image at the table, let's say. They're not going to assume that you have the same amount of bluffs in your range as you otherwise would. So if you start folding all the marginal spots, it actually starts to decrease the EV of all the really good spots. So you're now not only sacrificing a slightly profitable spot in the moment, you're also playing a strategy that decreases the value of all the really good spots.
And this is kind of the Kessler effect.
Yeah. Kessler can't get any value because he never fucking bluffs.
Right.
To like say that in simpler terms, it's if you have an old man coffee at the table and he never 3-bets, but when he 3-bets and he gets aces and there's a raise in front of him and he 3-bets, yes, of course, that's good value for him. He's going to win some money with that hand, but not as much as if he had a normal 3-bet range.
Right. Your whole strategy.
Everyone just knows and they just fold.
Your whole strategy is built around allowing you to maximize the amount of money that you win with the top of your range. Everything else, yes, it's going to be somewhere between break even and winning a decent amount. But everything else is a supplement to, it's a bonus on top of the amount of value that you get with the top of your range. And you don't have the option to play a strategy where you only take the really, really good spots with the top of your range, because it's fundamentally changing the EV of those hands.
I will say, and this is the way that I thought about it. I kind of tweeted that, like, I've thought a lot about this throughout the years. I think anybody who plays a reasonable amount of tournaments spends a lot of time deep in thought about just the structure of the game format that you're playing and what ways we can potentially manipulate our strategy predicated upon the structure. And I will say at its core, I think what Ben means is that there's a dependency on every decision that you make in an MTT, right? Like, it's a choose your own adventure. You are dealt a path, and every winner of every event was offered a certain path, right? And they made choices along that path that ultimately allowed them to be chosen or not. And, you know, if we were able to, if we had a crystal ball, if we believed in determinism or things of that nature, the second that you register, someone's a winner, right? Like, it's predetermined based off of distribution, like someone's a winner. But
whether it takes them 6 bullets or 1.
Well, man, you really know how to derail something. That means nothing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying if you believe in determinism.
Oh, sure.
Right? It's already predetermined when you register who the winner is. It's just, you know, it's random.
It's fate.
In some essence, right? If you don't believe in determinism, then it's just random, and the math will ultimately iron itself out. But the point is that the path from first hand off to last hand dealt is it's essentially there for your taking, right? Like, somebody gets to choose based off of the decision-making process how effectively they navigate. And I think that dependency kind of fucks with the way that we think about things, because when you examine chip EV, it's independent, right? That's why cash is so beautiful. Every spot is independent of the last. And then you have this metagame that's actually dependent, that can effectively shift ranges in certain directions that you always have to consider, which is why live cash is so fucking beautiful. And online cash, like, that metagame largely doesn't exist. And now you just get to solve every single hand independently of the last and just, you know, play for max EV. It's what kind of hurts the online environment while helping the live environment, laying that meta over top and introducing some level of dependency to a game structure that otherwise is fully independent makes the game, like, kind of beautiful to real-time solve. When you're talking about MTTs, though, everything is dependent. All decisions are intertwined. A decision that I make on table 7 with 14 people left is going to affect somebody at the other table who has yet to act on their hand. So not only is there a dependency between every hand that I play, but there's a dependency of like all the decisions I make on all the people around me, and vice versa. And the best we can do to quantify that is the ICM model, which is wildly imperfect. So I think what Ben is largely speaking to is this notion of dependency. And if I'm just passing on 0 EV spots now, it won't really have any impact on the future because it's effectively registering as a 0 in real time, and therefore the dependency moving forward won't really get altered one way or the other, right? I'll just remain static. But the way that I thought about it, and I guess like this was more observational, because I used to get mind fucked like that, where it would be like I'd run a bluff and get picked off and then immediately like get aces 2 hands later. And just be like, fuck, man. Like if I just hadn't torched off 40 big blinds, you know, I'd be able to, but you forget about that there's a dependency aspect to everything else, right? The easiest way to quantify it is like you just get a full double now for 25 blinds when you have aces versus a hand that would have never gone broke for 75, right? And now suddenly it's like, oh, you did net better, right? Like you somehow came out of it with more chips when it was all said and done than had you just folded the other spot, maintained your stack, got the same aces versus the same hand, and won fewer chips due to the depth.
The other part of it is like the guy saw you torch it off previously and would not have called in a certain spot if you hadn't done that and if he hadn't seen it happen, right? So like that's the other part of it.
Yeah, and I mean like he's speaking a lot to the inverse of it, where it's just like I think the problem is that the notion of passing on risk and volatility is just kind of against the spirit of what MTTs are. The second you sign up, you're just signing up for a risk template. You know what I mean? And it's rarely going to be about finding situations to be risk off. There will be plenty of situations where you need to mitigate risk, right? And I think we see this a lot in the ICM model. When you're middling stacks, you just aren't afforded to take on nearly as much risk. And we use risk premiums to kind of quantify that. But there's rarely situations where, outside of satellites, where you're so risk off that like top of range doesn't exist. You know, like aces is just a fold pre.
Yeah.
It's almost a 0 likelihood. And the reason for that is because accumulation and volatility is still mandatory to win the event.
You'll see people who always say like, it's way too early to flip. You know, it's way too early to flip in this tournament. And the to expand on that is they're usually, you know, not calculating the flip correct, like the ranges correctly, where it's like you see their hand and be like, against that range, that's not a flip, right? It's just like you are just torching money here because
when people say that to me, when people say that to me, I honestly don't think it was ever a flip. I honestly think that they had me dominated like 80-20.
Yeah, right. They'll like fold 10s in a spot where like the opponent's range like clearly contains 8s and 9s,
right?
And you're like, well, what are you doing?
You rejam like deuces from the small blind or something, and then they just muck 7s, and they're like, I didn't want to flip. Okay, thanks.
right, exactly.
This happened in like one of the win tournaments where button opens, I jam ace 10 off from the small blind for like 25, and just like I didn't really see you play many hands, and I don't want to flip in this spot. And like said he folded 9s, and it's like that's fucking great for me, you know?
Yeah,
you just folded 9s,
so good.
You're supposed to. If he's folding 9s, he's probably folding ace jack off.
Yeah, but a lot of that just speaks to the larger point of the vast majority of people playing tournaments don't understand MTT strategy.
Right.
And I think that, you know, there's a higher level discussion to be had with Ben's tweet where it is in good faith and there's a notion, like he touches on certain things that we haven't yet been able to model out and might actually have some level of relevance when it comes to early spots versus mid spots, etc. But the problem is that the tweet assumes that everybody has a baseline knowledge of, you know, general poker strategy where they're not losing players, they're not break-even players, like they have win rate.
Right, you've studied this much, your win rate's worth something.
That's such a fraction of his audience, like such a tiny sliver of any poker audience, not just his.
I don't think it's a bad faith tweet, but I do think that for the people that are actually going to be paying attention to it, it's horrible advice.
Right.
Because most of those people are going to be in the category where they would benefit a lot more from being much more willing to just flip it off with 35 bigs than from trying to find more spots to fold and trying to find more edges to pass up.
Yeah,
Things
if you're a losing player, think how hard it is to try to figure out if a spot is 0 EV or not.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just almost impossible.
Exactly.
It's kind of funny too, because it's almost ingrained in the culture, right? Like I kind of promote the game from a very different angle. I'm always leaning into the side of being gambly and just like saying like good luck getting me to fold, because truthfully at its highest level, poker is not played with regard to making a lot of folding mistakes, right? Like generally speaking, good players will not make folding errors. They're going to make calling errors. They're going to make aggressive errors. They're going to over bluff. They're just going to realize
Overbluff,
their
call
equity.
too wide.
Right, yeah, it's just going to come down to good players are going to do their damnedest to realize their fair share of equity, if not over-realize.
Or like rocket jam a bluff in a spot for a spot that shouldn't. You know.
Right, so my lens through which I promote the game and, even training from the Solve for Why standpoint is it's very much risk on. It's very much from the standpoint of you just don't make money in this game by folding. And I know that's a generalization, but and not one that's accurate at a nuanced level. But in a general sense, it's absolutely accurate, right? You're very much rewarded for being the aggressive player. You're very much rewarded for being the player willing to take on risk, even if it's from the calling standpoint. So I think that the irony is that I'll get conflated with being a whale way more than Jonathan or Ben or Torelli or anybody who's out there promoting a conservative risk off type of message would ever get conflated. But the truth of the matter is, like, you want both players in your game, but if you had to build a game of 8 of one profile versus the other, it would always be the person who's overfolding. It would always be the person who's playing too conservatively. Because yeah, it's a slower bleed, and yeah, it'll take you longer to accumulate the money, but it's variance free, right? If you have 8 guys that are willing to stick their neck out on the line and call way too often and bluff way too often and aggress way too often, not only are you going to suffer a lot of variance, but you might not even be winning versus the collective.
Right. The irony is that the only way to be playing a game where you would massively reduce the amount of variance you took on is if you were playing against a bunch of players who were all turning down every marginal spot. Like if you were playing against a bunch of nits, you would now be in a circumstance where your standard deviation would be really, really low,
right? Because
you'd be playing nothing but small pots all the time.
And the irony is this advice would be totally different.
Exactly.
Right? It would be, it wouldn't be pass on the 0 EV spots. It would be reframed, right? It would be pass on bluff catching spots because they're too passive.
Yeah.
So they're not bluffing.
Right.
So just pass on situations where it's unlikely we're making any money, and instead turn it around and just continue to step on their throat and redline them.
Yeah, I fucked this up in a Florida tournament a while back where I folded ace king to a 4-bet where I didn't know if the guy was actually, call it bluffing enough, or I folded ace king to a 5-bet, sorry, where I didn't know if he was like 5-bet bluffing enough or 4-bet bluffing enough or what the fuck ever. I just forgot. But point being, I look at hands later from the same guy where he 3-bets big blind versus button with like 8-6 off. And I'm like, oh, this was a huge mistake, right? I just got absolutely wrecked by this guy for sure. And it's like, you know what? I didn't know this was going on prior, but now that I have the information, that's never going to happen versus this guy again.
Right.
And I'm okay with, call it, making that so wide deviation because I don't know any better. And I think in spots where you don't really have an idea, it's okay. But you have to have the baseline of what the 4-bet range is supposed to be like in the first place.
Right. And
like,
even in the spots where you don't know, you still have to weigh the possibilities against each other. So you have to say, okay, if I'm right, then maybe this is a small gain. If I'm wrong, it's a massive loss. Therefore, I'm going to weigh this up and say, okay, well, I'm going to lean on the side of assuming I'm wrong because the downside of being wrong is greater than the upside of being right. And sometimes it's the inverse. Sometimes maybe you're thinking about making a reasonably big fold on the river, but it's a big pot and you're getting a decent price. And the upside of being right that it's fine to call is much greater than the downside of being wrong in that case, because even if they're bluffing like the optimal amount, when you win, you win a lot, let's say. So like there's plenty of ways you can balance the two possibilities against each other.
Yeah, and I think that that's like a very important point to touch on. Kind of bringing this back to the different philosophies of how you view the game. There are only certain things that we can like put our fingers on and try to quantify in a general sense, right? Like we understand loosely how to quantify what a zero EV spot is, right? Mm-hmm. Or I mean, it's not loose. It's defined by the nature that it's making no dollars, right? That's how it's quantified. But we qualify that by basically calling them bluff catchers, right? And I think it's very important to understand and message appropriately. Like, I'm the just pay guy, right? But I'm mostly projecting that message out because the majority of hands that people want to fold are not zero EV, right? Like
some bluff catchers win money. They're not just zero.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like, I think that there's this big conflation of what these terms mean because
like bluff catcher means zero.
Right. Well, specifically because we qualify things through the EV that they're making, right? So we qualify, we quantify things by the EV that they're making, and we quantify a zero EV bluff catcher as making $0, right? That's understood. What's not understood or what's not demonstrated to the general populace is how to actually identify what these zero EV hands are.
Right.
And then they conflate it with all hands that are bluff catchers are making zero EV. Mm-hmm. And that's simply just not true.
It's more so like the always never principle that a lot of people go off of without looking at solver strategy.
And they don't mean to. It's not that they mean to simplify. And I shouldn't even say they, because a lot of this comes from the top down, right? A lot of this comes from the messaging of people who are out here teaching and things of that nature. Nobody means to oversimplify things and get to a degree where they're like, well, if I don't beat bluffs, then I'm in a zero EV spot. Or sorry, if I don't beat value, then I'm in a zero EV spot, right? That's a loose way of putting it. But the problem is that you're already inherently assuming that you know what their value range looks like and where it's cut off.
And you're assuming that bluffs don't exist.
And you're also assuming that they don't bluff. And you're also assuming that, they don't ever do anything randomly or anything along those lines. And the problem with all of these assumptions are that the person making them tends to be unstudied. So they'll look at a spot where it's like an ace jack 2 4 jack board, and they'll face a river bet, and they'll think to themselves, an ace can't bet here for value. And they're just wrong, right? They're just dead wrong. Like, an ace has plenty enough pot share here to bet for value. So they're folding like maybe top of bluff catching range. Maybe they have a hand like ace 10 or ace queen, and they're just mucking because they think like, oh, well, I can't find the bluffs, and he definitely doesn't bet an ace here for value. And it's like, well, you're just smack dab wrong.
Yeah. And I had a great example of this that a student sent me a hand last night where he bluff catched 3 streets with second pair it was like an ace queen 4 8 ace or something, right? So the river paired the ace, and he called down with queen 6 and did it because he was unblocking a lot of bluffs. But it turned out that the bluffs that he was unblocking are not hands that are actually supposed to bluff in that spot.
Like the king 10,
the king 10, the king jack, like all that stuff. Those hands are actually going to have enough showdown value. They're not supposed to bluff that river. So if you start basing your bluff catching decisions on the assumption that those hands are supposed to bluff, it's going to result in a totally different output, because one assumption being slightly off is going to change the entire thing.
Right. Like, that's okay, because a lot of people just aren't going to be armed with perfect information.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean perfect from the range construction of your opponents or anything like that. I mean from they haven't looked at a spot yet, so they're just left to their own devices in real time to make a decision.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, if they assumed that that's where the bluff range came from in real time, and they made a decision predicated off of that, and it was a good decision off of what they believe to be true, then that's okay. Go look at the spot, learn that that's not where the bluffs come from, and adjust.
Sometimes people even do bluff king 10.
Right.
You
Yeah.
win.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like, I think another important part to the puzzle is the assumptions based off of pot odds, where sometimes you just think they're never bluffing, but they bet 10% pot. Or you think they're always bluffing and they bet half pot. And it's like, oh, a price matters a lot in this instance.
Price matters a lot, and it's important to remember, especially in MTTs, that the chips don't matter that much.
Yeah.
Right? If you're facing 10% pot on the end and like it's just literally you lighting it on fire, that's kind of okay. Because the amount of big blinds that you're torching, if you're 100% wrong, is very, 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 very.
Like
very
calling
small.
mixed games.
The other thing that I think is also part of this that we haven't really touched on yet is I think that it's a weird aspect of this. Happens with cash games as well, but people tend to focus so much on bluff catching when they think about these spots. They think so much about, should I call the river or not in a situation where I'm facing a bet? And what they're not thinking about is the fact that a lot of the volatility in your strategy and the variance that you suffer in a bunch of different spots is all to do with how you play on the earlier streets as well. Because, for example, one of the things that I think is actually doable when it comes to mitigating variance in a situation where you do have a really big edge. So let's say you get dealt a day one table in the main event that is insanely soft, right? One thing there that does mitigate volatility and variance to some degree is taking, in a spot where EVs are close together, in a spot where a hand mixes pre-flop, when you take the lower volatility option, like you call instead of you 3-bet, you do, in theory, create a circumstance where the pot is less likely to become massively inflated. But of course, you have to add in that element of, if you just always take the call option, well, now it affects the perception of your 3-bet range. But it is really significant that people kind of be aware of the fact that it's not just your bluff catching and what you do in these marginal river spots that influences variance. It's like, how often are you check raising? What sizes are you using on earlier streets? What open sizes are you using? What 3-bet sizes are you using? What 4-bet sizes? All this stuff on the earlier streets, that has a much bigger impact on variance than just what you do in one specific river bluff catching situation.
Yeah, I think that there's a very specific reason why people focus on bluff catching, and
because they don't like it.
Well, yes, they don't like it, but also it's I think it's a symptom, not the ailment, right? It's not the actual illness, it's a symptom thereof. Right. And again, it goes back to risk, right? So since the vast majority of people are trying to mitigate risk at every turn, they find themselves taking the passive option at a much higher frequency. And the more passive options you take, the more often you're backed into a corner to bluff catch, and the less often you're put in a position to actually bluff yourself.
That's very true. It's funny how when you actually take the higher volatility options on the earlier streets, sometimes it can lead to a reduction in the frequency that you actually end up in those incredibly difficult break-even spots. It's because you just end up getting a fold earlier on. So there's obviously that aspect to it as well, and that's why it's a difficult equation when you're faced with a hand that mixes in theory and you have to try to figure out what to do in practice with it.
I think ultimately what I'm arriving at, continually like seeing these types of posts and us always engaging with them by trying to generate a conversation that I think maybe gets misconstrued as attacks.
Flamed constantly for a month.
I mean, like, it's not meant to be an attack, right? It's meant to just have discourse based off of something that is said with a lot of authority and a lot of direction.
Some of the tweets he makes are pretty good too. Like, I'm looking at a tweet a couple days ago saying, like, you play big stack at FT completely wrong, here's why, and then puts a bunch of bullet points and explains, like, being you're too aggressive in the wrong spots, attacking the wrong stacks, not closing the action, flat calling too much, and underestimating the concept of equity realization. And like, these are all true things, you know, and these are things that I fuck up all the time. And it's parts that you have to study of, like, okay, this guy's short, can I attack him? This guy's opening pretty tight, can I attack him? And like, looking through the thread, it's like, this is a really good thread, you know? So maybe here and there sometimes, like, we get a good thread in the strat chat versus the negative.
Right. Well, that's not the bigger point I'm trying to make. The bigger point I'm trying to make is that I think what happens is that those of us who are in the market to teach recognize where the pain points lie, and rather than putting out content that serves to eliminate the pain points, we put out content that serves to highlight, amplify, and relieve a lot of the pain points. Right. So rather than, and to be clear, like, this is something that I'm super conscious of, and I try to build our I mean, look, the name we chose was not an accident, right? Like, the whole idea was that we want to approach poker from a root cause analysis standpoint, and anybody who takes the time to dive into our content and wants to train with us is going to notice that like we're not going to band-aid the symptom. Instead, we're going to try to get to the root cause illness. And I think that that's what this ultimately boils down to is it's way easier to sell content when you are marketing to the actual ailment rather than fixing it, right? So if you just recognize that everybody sucks at bluff catching and it's the most painful part of the game, but it's also the thing that they're doing the most, rather than teaching them a strategy that avoids bluff catching, you teach them a strategy that allows them to navigate bluff catching in a more comfortable way that is ultimately hurting their bottom line long term, right? So by putting out things that say like, hey, just dump a hand that's making money on the flop because you're going to run into spots later that you're not able to navigate. That's just addressing the symptom, not the ailment, right? That's just basically saying, here's a Band-Aid. This isn't going to get you better, but it's going to fix the problem that you're currently having. And then a whole host of new problems are going to form, and we'll just correct those as they come. The better solution is to say, like, if your inclination is to fold hands that are winning on the flop versus a C-bet, then we need to figure out why. Oh, it's because you're uncomfortable navigating future streets where this hand becomes break even or losing. Let's get to the bottom of why that happens strategically. And let's walk you through it. That's a lot harder of a process. You know?
Hey, how about you get better at strategy? Oh, fuck.
Right. Right. So instead of like...
Take it back.
Right. I mean, think about it though. Like at the end of the day, it's not about teaching people to fold that hand on the flop. It's about teaching them how to check raise better on flop, turn, and river. How to fold a later street when a disadvantageous card comes for them, as opposed to taking the lead on an advantageous card with these portions of range. It's all about teaching aspects of hand classes and range morphology throughout the streets, right? But that's complex.
Yeah.
As opposed to just saying like, are you in an uncomfortable spot? Just fold.
It's the difference between trying to teach someone to feel better about the experience of losing at poker versus trying to teach someone to actually play better.
Right.
And that's the issue I have with a lot of these tweets that go out, is that what feels good for someone who's learning poker is not what's going to generally be the most profitable, because we are not built to play this game. It's an incredibly difficult game for humans to play. We don't understand it very well. We generally suck at it, and getting better at it is really, really hard because you have to put in a lot of time and energy to stuff that isn't easily intuitive. And for most people, they are much more eager to get a quick solution that, even if they don't necessarily see a big benefit from it, or they don't necessarily see a lot more money going into their pocket because of it, it makes them enjoy the game more, or it makes them feel better, or it makes them feel more confident. But, you know, it's frustrating when you see stuff out there that might make somebody feel more confident, but in the long run might actually be doing them a little bit of harm.
It's like the meme where it's like the two stands of like comforting lies and harsh, unpleasant truths, and like everyone's in the line of the comforting lies.
Yeah.
Like, poker's a lot harder than it looks.
Well, that's kind of the thing too. Then it becomes a question of, is that the role that poker training should largely serve? Just
the unpleasant truth.
I feel like that's a whole different podcast episode.
No, it is. It's not something I want to dig into now, but is it just more about messaging to recreationals and serious regs in a way where they feel more comfortable with their experience, as opposed to, you know, approaching a high level of comprehension?
Maybe the business that makes people feel comfortable is going to be called solve for why not, you know? Solve for what, or something that people always
you want to stuff a bunch of money in the middle? Why not?
Do you get those gags at the table, Burke, as well? Because I
only from honestly from the it's people who qualify as telling dad jokes always.
Okay.
But not age wise. Like it could be someone as nerdy as like a 24-year-old who just has no sense of humor and his best attempt is a dad joke.
See, the tournament pool, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just me or what, but I seem to get the very earnest attempts at making a joke based off of solve for why. It's always like, it's solve for what, or solve for why did he do that, or solve for why did you just make that play, or like some stupid line that like the person is not they're not delivering it in like a dad joke way. It's always like they think it's the first time anybody's ever made that
That's
joke.
what makes it a dad joke.
Yeah, but like,
You know what I mean? Like, it's obviously A, it's low hanging fruit, but B, it's also just very rarely funny.
Ryan, how many times have you said a joke like this?
So many.
yeah. See,
my name online is Solve for Bride.
But that's actually at least funny.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. See,
That's a good play on words.
To me, what defines a dad joke is, do you know that it's not actually very funny, or do you genuinely believe it's like really hilarious? Because if you genuinely believe it's really hilarious, it stops becoming a dad joke. The whole point of dad jokes is they're not really that funny, but because you say them anyway, even though you know it's not that funny, it now becomes funny.
Is it funny because it's a dad joke, or is it a dad joke because it's not funny?
I assume the latter.
That's meta.
I thought it was exactly the latter, and I thought all dads believe their jokes to be funny, which is what kind of
See,
quality.
I was on the assumption that all dads recognize that their jokes are not very funny, but they say them anyway, which is what makes them dad jokes.
My dad loved the one like when we went to get food and stuff, and the plates would be clean, and it'd be like, "Oh, like how was the food?" And then he'd be like, "It didn't come out yet." It's like,
Oh
come
my
on.
God.
It's like, come on.
Bro, no, they know. They know. They know it's not funny.
Well, the thing is,
Or-
when
but
I
they-
make
they think it
when
is.
I make a dad joke, it cracks me up, and
My dad loves it.
Right? Yeah. Like I'll say a dad joke, and I'm like, "This is so stupid," but that's what makes me laugh.
It's just for
and
him.
And then Berkey over there rolling his eyes makes it even better.
Right.
Maybe that's the definition of a dad joke. A dad joke is a joke that's told purely for the benefit of the person who's telling it.
Right,
Like,
exactly. They're like,
nobody else is going to
yeah.
think it's funny, but you're
Yeah,
going to think it's
doesn't
funny,
matter.
and that's what counts.
I got my enjoyment, and that's all that matters.
That's funny.
It's
Jokes are for him only.
it's a high level of cringe. But yeah, I have the funny thing is the people who make the jokes, they don't stop trying. Like there's always one guy who will just for an entire session try to make a play on words on Solve for Why. And like not only is it not funny, but it'll be misapplied so often where like I won't be in a hand and they'll say something along the lines of like Berkey's gonna show you why to solve for that one, and it's like
I get that too.
What?
I get that too. I get the like random comment when I'm not in a hand, as if this guy has been like thinking about me for the last like half hour. And how can I make a pun about the patch
He was
this guy
just
is
waiting
wearing?
for the moment, you know?
Yeah.
Like every time you play pot, he's like, "This is the one.
Like,
This is the one."
I get that, and I'm like, what are you doing? Am
In
I,
general,
like, am I
puns
like in
just-
your head rent free? What's going on here? Like,
puns just like aren't funny. But man, I have a lot of respect for the people who like sit on it for a long period of time where they're just like, this is gonna fucking hit. And then they get it out, and either they mess up the delivery, or it just was never gonna hit.
I know bangers. This is not a banger.
Yeah.
This is not a banger.
See, as a British person who highly values comedy, I do not respect those people, because if you're going to sit on a joke for a while and have it in the chamber, it's got to be good.
Oh,
It can't be a dumb pun.
I am so here for somebody who's willing to put 30 minutes into a high degree of cringe, not recognizing how cringe it is. Just like, man, God bless you. You're so oblivious. That's great.
See, I have the stereotypical British attitude to American comedy, which is that all of it is cringe unless it's smart, in which case it becomes not cringe. Like you have to be sarcastic or smart in some way to impress a British person with your comedy.
Man, you're missing out on so many good poop and dick jokes.
Yeah, it's a little too lowbrow for me, you know?
Yeah.
I got to be a bit more sophisticated with it.
Yeah, I get it. You got the posh accent. That
Yeah,
makes a lot of
exactly.
sense.
Like I've got the accent, I got to live up to it.
Yeah, Mormon out there, he's laughing at the dick and poop jokes.
Yeah, Mormon's very working class. I'm working class too, but he's got more of a working class accent than me, so he gets away with a little bit of a
There
different
was a
perception.
day where I was hanging out with Liv Brie. This must have been like 15 years ago. 10
Livery
years
is
ago.
not working class.
No.
Livery is like
But she was explaining to
the
me
opposite.
all of the different accents in England.
Yeah.
And she went through, it must have been a half a dozen different accents.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, this is a posh accent, like the Queen's English.
Yeah,
and
what she has is a posh accent.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then she's like, this is like what more of like where Mormons from. And then it was like all these derivatives thereof. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, how the fuck? Like, I get it. We have our own dialects here that range also,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not that easy to just attribute it to class.
Yeah.
Like most of the dialects are to region, and they're a byproduct of immigration. But in England, it just seems like it's a hard line of like, how affluent are
Right,
you?
you speak like this, you're rich. You speak like that, you're poor.
Yeah.
It is pretty much like that, and it's simply because that for some reason the tradition evolved in a way where upper class people would be like educated out of their accent, you know. So like if you first of all, like if you're upper class, you're not going to be from like a certain area. So like the North, for example, the reason why the northern accent is what it is because there were very few like upper class families there, like back in the day, and the upper class families that did exist, like they didn't want to be associated with this accent, so they would like try to mimic the accent of all the really, really upper class like royalty types, and so it just became this thing where if you're rich and you want to make sure that everybody around you knows you're rich, this is how you speak.
Right.
And if you don't care about that and you want to just fit in with everybody else in the local area, you just keep your local accent. So it's a historical thing, but hopefully it's changing because it's bullshit.
I don't know, man. I'm here for it. Let's have the diverse accents. If the Yinzer accent ever goes away,
You don't
I'm
really
gonna
have
say-
an accent.
Down.
You grew out of your accent.
I grew out of it, but I also like
you elevated.
Well, no. I didn't really have it to the degree of the people who are around us. Like I would say things like yins, but I've never exaggerated the the AU sound on the
Downtown.
O. Right.
But neither do you, Brian.
Yes, he does.
I do, but not
He's
not to
growing
the
out of it?
degree. Not
Right.
to the degree.
I've never heard of
like some
yins
people.
from Brian.
No. I mean that we stopped saying.
Yeah, I don't. Like,
It's
now you just
as
say
a kid you
now
say
you
it.
just say yins as a joke.
Right. Like I don't
Right.
say ain't anymore either.
I
But
say
like,
ain't sometimes.
As a kid,
Ain't a word.
I did a lot.
Yeah.
But the ah sound, the down town, you know, like that I never really had. I always had the
Brian
the
had
more,
that?
Yeah, he still kind of does.
Downtown.
There are a couple words that Brian says that make me laugh every
Yeah.
single time he says them, and I can't think off the top of my head what
Right.
they are. But like, yeah, my best friend Jace, he would say in that after
Yeah.
every single sentence. He'd be like, "You want to go out tonight, Nat?" And
Still
it's
does. Still does this.
Still does. Just like
Go get some
routinely.
beers in that.
Yeah, it's funny. You can do that with the UK as well. You can, from certain bits of slang, you can pick up where someone's from. Like the people from London, they'll say "in it" at the end of stuff. Like
and it.
Bowie says
you know,
that a lot.
bruv is another one. If
Toby?
you call someone bruv,
Bowie.
like
Oh, yeah.
that's like from the. You're not, if you're from the north, you're not going to call someone bruv.
Henry
it's a southern thing.
Henry loves to say bruv.
Yeah, it's because he's a southern Englishman. Yeah, that's me too. Like I don't say bruv very much, but it's the same sort of thing. Like if you're from the north, you won't say it. The north probably has other variations on that they'll say, but like it's very much the thing.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah, man. I wish I could remember the Lamanna trigger words, the Lamanna isms.
They'll
if you
come
will.
up. They'll come back.
They always
The
do.
Lamanisms.
Tortoisisms.
Tortisms.
They always do.
Is it tautology? Tautology is a
How
different
would
word.
you say
but
tortoise with a Pittsburgh accent?
I think it's,
Tart? No, I can't.
I think it's
Tortoise.
immune.
No,
It's a
I can't.
tortoise.
Tortoise.
It's immune.
It's a tortoise.
Yeah.
All right. Shout out to everybody in the chat.
Shout out.
That's going to do it for us today. We're going to be back again tomorrow, noon Pacific. We'll be joined by one Poo Dog Melissa and one Pip Dog Pip, who is assed out on her bed
Dead.
right now.
She's an EP.
I feel like I need to pick her up to say goodbye.
No,
she
let her
needs to
No,
sleep.
no, let her sleep.
No, she's awake now. Come on, Pip. Let's say goodbye to the people.
Aw.
Oh.
Aw.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Oh, that's adorable.